and all who would serve you and seek for your salvation. We thank you for this opportunity, and we give unto thee all praise and honour, for thou art great and high and holy. And we look at a world round about us, a world in denial of a God, a world who seeks their own glory, and we pray that your kingdom will come, for that time when thy will shall be done upon this earth. And so we thank you for this opportunity and give you all praise and honour through thy Son, even Jesus the Christ. Amen. Right, so we're in the middle now. We've looked at Abraham and Isaac. We're now moving on to Jacob. We'll be looking, as I said, at page 27 of our notes and seeking the blessing, which John will open up with.
Isn't it Jacob that had the coat of many colours?
Joseph.
Oh, Joseph. Yeah, that's coming next week. Next week. Oh, yeah, I'm going to slip past you.
Oh, right, yeah, I'll sit on the other side.
Do you need this? Yeah, Genesis 27 on page 27. So, yeah, that's the one.
It's Genesis 27 on page 27.
Yeah. Okay, so he does, right. So let's do a brief recap. So we'll start off with Abraham. So Abraham here. Who was Abraham married to? Sarah. He was married to Sarah. Who was his other sort of servant wife? Hagar, yes. It's a good way to remember it, isn't it? So what was the name of Abraham's son through Hagar? Ishmael. And their son, Abraham's son through Sarah? Is it Isaac? Okay. So who did Isaac marry? Rebecca, yes, that's right. So Rebecca, and what were the names of their children?
Oh, that was last week.
Yes, yeah, we're just revising and then we'll get into it.
Twins.
Twins, yes. Do you remember?
No, I don't remember. Something with N, I think.
J and E.
Jacob?
So Jacob and Esau. Which was the older twin?
That Jacob, I think it was first.
No.
Esau was,
Yeah.
because he had to serve the other brother.
Yeah, and it's quite important actually that he was older, as we see from the story today, because the story today from Genesis 27 minutes. I've got twins, and the older one is 1 minute older than the other one, but she's still older.
I'm half an hour older. The last, the one which comes
No.
first.
The one that comes first, Esau. Esau is first. Now, in those days, not so much nowadays, the firstborn had the special privileges. Were any of you firstborn? You weren't. You're last.
The firstborn,
No.
the first male born was always to go into God's service.
Yes. Katie's the only one who's firstborn. So Katie's got special privileges. Thank you. Okay, so yeah. So what we're going to find, they have what's called a birthright. So Ron said they got special privileges, they go into God's service, sometimes they're called the priest of the family, and they also get a double inheritance compared to the other siblings that they have.
What happened to my life?
Yes. And also, because of that birthright, they get a special blessing as well. And we'll see both those words, birthright and blessing, come out. So let's come. First of all, we're going to go to Genesis 25, because really the story starts there in terms of the birthright. So let's come in. And we noticed last week the two twins were different. Esau, he enjoyed hunting, getting out into the field, the chase, the thrill of catching animals.
The hairy hen.
Exactly, yes. So that was Esau. He wasn't very interested in God. Jacob, it's called in verse 27 of Genesis 25, a quiet man. It means upright. So he loved the things of God. And we're told in verse 28 of Genesis 25, Isaac loved Esau because he ate of his game. Rebekah loved Jacob. So there's a sort of a little bit sad. You shouldn't really have favourites, should you? It doesn't go well. So
God had a favourite there as well.
yes, he did. So Isaac's favourite was Esau because he enjoyed the eating of his hunt.
They are favored because I noticed in my family, my oldest brother was the most important boy of he was the favorite. He could have got away with the more.
Really? Oh, that's not good, is it? So this comes into play now, because what we'll do, let's do some reading. So let's read from Genesis 25, verse 29 to 34. And let's read round. Should we start with Ron? So Genesis 25, verse 29. You got it? Yeah,
Once when Jacob was cooking some stew, Esau came in from the open country, famished. He said to Jacob, "Quick, let me have some of that red stew. I'm famished." That is why he was also called Edom.
Yeah, let's continue. So verse 31.
Jacob replied,
Jacob replied, "First send me your birthright. Look, I am about to die," Esau said. "What good is the birthright to me?" Jacob said, "Swear to me first." After some he swore an oath to him, saving his birthright to Jacob. Then Jacob gave Esau some bread and some lentil stew. He ate and drank and then got up and left. So Esau despised his birthright.
Okay, so hopefully from that we can get the story. So Jacob was back at camp. He was cooking some stew, we're told there. Esau's gone out on one of his hunts and he's come back absolutely exhausted. It must have been very fast animals he was catching that day. And he said to Jacob, as he saw and he smelt that stew cooking, "Oh, just give me some because I'm just totally exhausted." Jacob was a very clever and cunning person, and so he gets that opportunity. He says, "Esau, you're the older one, you sell me your birthright." And you could, the birthright can pass to people under certain circumstances. Not this one particularly. So, for example, the older brother could lose their birthright if they were doing something dumb or stupid. His father could say, "No, it's not going to you, it's going to someone else of your siblings."
I just found an interesting quote coming.
Okay.
That.
Yep.
Sell me your birthright. In ancient times, the birthright included the inheritance rights of the firstborn. Jacob was ever the schemer, seeking by any means to gain advantage over others. But it was by God's appointment and care, not Jacob's wits.
Yes, I know. Yeah, that's very good. Yeah. And that happens throughout Jacob's life. Like, he tries to organise things and get things, and really, it was God in control.
Yeah, it's a schemer.
Yeah.
Manipulating it.
So, just a point here, at the end of verse 34, so Esau thought, "Oh yeah, well, he probably wasn't going to die, but he was pretty tired, and he said, 'Yep, I'll sell it for that pot of stew.' And Jacob gave him that pot of stew. He sold his birthright. So just in an instant, gone. So the point is, Esau lived for the present. He didn't think about the future. He wasn't interested in the future and what was going to come in the future. He was just in it for the here and now, which isn't good. Now, there's an interesting verse in Hebrews 12 which comments on this. So Hebrews 12, verse 16 and 17. Do you want to read that, Greg? Hebrews 12, 16, 17. Yep, verse 16 and 17. Yeah, so that's like a little commentary on Genesis 25 record. Esau sold his birthright for a single meal. Guess what? The next day, he'd have got hungry again. And so for a single meal, his birthright gone. So birthright, something which God had established, something special, something which related to the future, related to service, to family, and so on, gone. Single meal. And verse 17 tells us, afterwards, when he desired to inherit the blessing, he's rejected. No, he didn't get it. Now, what we're going to look at now, which is Genesis 27, is the blessing. Now, this is quite interesting because who did Isaac favor? He favored Esau. So come to Genesis, back to Genesis 27. So, this is Isaac's intention. Who is he going to bless? Now, Isaac would have known that Esau did that silly thing in selling his birthright for that mess of stew. Yet, we come to Genesis 27 and verse 1. When Isaac was old and his eyes were dim, though he could not see, he called Esau, his older son, and said to him, "My son," he said, answered, "Here am I." He said, "Behold, I am old. I do not know the day of my death. Take your weapons, your quiver, your bow, go into the field, hunt game for me, prepare for me delicious food such as I love. Bring it to me so that I may eat, that my soul may bless you before I die." So Isaac's intention in Genesis 27 is to bless Esau. He likes Esau. He likes the game, the deer, or whatever they ate. When Esau went out to hunt, came back, cooked it, and Isaac would have eaten it, and he liked that. And so his intention was to bless Esau, even though Esau had sold his birthright to Jacob. No, Isaac is going to bless Esau. Genesis 27, it didn't work out like that. Fortunately, because God's purpose wasn't for Isaac to bless Esau, it was to bless Jacob. Now, you might know the story of Genesis 27, how Isaac was tricked by Jacob and Rebekah. So Jacob pretended to be Esau, and he got the blessing from Isaac. So what we're going to do is just pick out a few points from the next few verses. So we note verse 5, Rebekah was listening in when Isaac spoke to his son Esau, and immediately Rebekah thought, no, that's not right. Jacob should be blessed, not Esau. And she goes about to scheme with Jacob to trick Esau. And so what they do together is that they prepare some food, as Esau would have done for Isaac. And then the problem was in verse 11, Jacob said to Rebekah, his mother, "Behold, my brother Esau is a hairy man, I'm a smooth man." So if his father Isaac feels him, you're not Esau, you're Jacob, because you haven't got enough hair. So what they did was actually, in verse 16, put skins of the young goats on the hands, so the backhand here, and the neck of Jacob. So that he dressed up like Esau and put animal skins on him so he felt furry. So it's total trickery. Isaac, of course, was blind, so he couldn't see him, he could just hear and feel. And that's what he does. So Jacob goes into his father and says, I am Esau, your firstborn, in verse 19. Please eat of my game, and then please bless me. And then Isaac sort of thinks, oh, hang on a minute, this is a bit quick. How come you come back so quick? And he said in verse 20, because the Lord your God granted me success. Now, that's interesting because Esau wasn't a particularly godly man. And yet, Jacob replies there, he uses God in his reply. And then Isaac feels Jacob. Are you really my son Esau or not? And the voice is Jacob's in verse 22. The hands are Esau's. Didn't recognize him. And he's tricked because of the animal skins that Jacob was wearing. And so the upshot was Isaac blessed Jacob. So let's just read verse 27 of Genesis 27. So Jacob came near and kissed him, that's Isaac. Isaac smelled the smell of his garments and blessed him and said, see, the smell of my son is as the smell of a field that the Lord has blessed. May God give you of the dew of heaven and of the fatness of the earth, plenty of grain and wine. Let people serve you, nations bow down to you. Be Lord over your brothers. May your mother's sons bow down to you. Cursed be everyone who curses you. Blessed be everyone who blesses you. And so there's a number of blessings that Isaac gives Jacob. The blessing of productive fields and of lots of rain from heaven. Also in verse 29 it says, let people serve you, be Lord over your brothers. So Jacob was to be Lord over Esau, according to this blessing here. So Esau would bow down to Jacob. So imagine if Isaac had actually blessed Esau doing that. It would have reversed God's purpose totally. And then we might recognize at the end of verse 29 a connection with the promises to Abraham. This is what's promised to Abraham about the curse. Be everyone who curses you, blessed be everyone who blesses you. Now, amazing blessing. And that's what God intended, Jacob to be blessed by Isaac, not Esau. And it happened. Now, can you imagine what happened in the story, though? Esau comes back from his hunt, prepares his food, presents it to Isaac, his father, and says, Isaac, my father, can you bless me now? And Isaac sort of realizes, hang on, who are you? And Esau says, oh, I'm Esau, your son Esau. And he said, all right, who is the person who I've just blessed? And he realizes at that moment, Rebekah and Jacob have tricked him so that he may receive the blessing. Now let's just note verse 33, Isaac's reaction. Then Isaac trembled very violently and said, who was it then that hunted game and brought it to me, and I ate it before you, and before you came, and I have blessed him? Yes, and he shall be blessed. At that moment, Isaac recognizes he was wrong in intending to bless Esau, and he recognizes God is at work and that Jacob is being blessed, not Esau. So Esau wasn't very happy, and now he wants to kill his brother Jacob for what he has done, for taking away his birthright and now taking away his blessing. So he wants to kill Jacob after Isaac, his father, dies. So what happens next is that Rebekah comes into the fore again and says to Jacob, oh, you better flee and get yourself up north to Syria, to Haran, and you're going to find yourself a wife there. And hopefully in the time you're there, Esau's anger will have cooled, because we can imagine Esau being very, very angry at this point about what had happened. So there's a number of lessons from Genesis 27, and there's a few of them. It was listed in the overheads.
I find this a little bit hard to understand, because what got given to each individual was for that individual, not been taken away. So his birthrights were given to him, more or less
Yep.
like a blessing from God.
Yeah.
And God gives you a present that's given to you, not for anybody else to take.
Yes. Now, very good point. So it's very, very special, and it's God-given too. But you can actually lose your birthright if you do something silly or stupid. So there's other instances in the Bible of people doing that. So for example, Reuben was the eldest son of Jacob, and yet the blessing actually went to his brother, Joseph, and also Judah was blessed as well. So, and Reuben did do something silly as well. Sorry? Yes, I know. They hated Joseph, didn't they? Another one, it's not an actual person as such, but Israel is called the firstborn son of God, and so they inherited the birthright as a nation, and yet they rejected God. And so...
And he hasn't taken that away from them, no?
No, what he did then is go to the Gentiles, and then he's going to bring them both together. So Jew and Gentile in the kingdom of God. I suppose there's a lesson for us, like, appreciate what God gives us, as in see it as special. Easter was in it for the here and now. I'm hungry, I want food, I'll buy it for anything. I'll buy it for my birthright, any price. And God doesn't want us to think like that. We're not in it for the present. We've got to think in the future.
But I think it is again some contradiction there, because there is one verse which I really like. They say, "Don't you worry about tomorrow."
Yes.
There's very much
Yes.
than
Matthew 6, I think that is, isn't it? Yeah. So, yeah, we don't worry or be anxious about tomorrow, so food or clothing.
enough problems today.
Yeah, exactly. Matthew 6 at the end of the chapter.
So it is a contradiction in it.
Not really, because we're talking about the eternal future. And we're not worried in that sense of worry. We live our lives looking for the kingdom rather than what we can get out of today. Like, people of this world sort of think, oh, what am I going to do? I'm going to get rich today. I want to do this. I want to go on a great holiday. And they don't think about what's coming in God's kingdom. Whereas we've got to...
So many Aborigines die in custody with their culture.
Right.
They can't see tomorrow.
Right.
For today, they can only... Today is their life.
Yes.
So what happens? You've incarcerated them.
Yes.
That's it. That's their life
So,
over.
yeah, dear
Right,
me.
so can't see into the future that maybe in 2 weeks
Yeah.
they'll be free and that, no, they're living for the moment,
Yeah.
not
Okay.
looking into the future.
Right. Okay. What I'll do now is I'll hand over to Ern. Do you want the whiteboard? Shall I rub it off?
Leave it as such.
Yeah, okay.
So I'm
The
not
rubber's there.
I'm not going to use much of it though.
Do you want it that turn around?
Yeah, I might. It's interesting, mine's called Seeking Another Wife, and at first I thought, what's that about? But then we had a servant of Abraham went getting a wife for Rebecca, and now where John finished, they're telling Jacob, look, your brother's getting angry, you go up to your uncle, stay with him until your brother stops being angry. And at the end of chapter 27, it says, Rebekah said to Isaac, I am weary of my life because of the daughters of Heth. The daughters of Heth in the Bible are also known as Hittites, so they weren't a good nation. And she said, I don't like these daughters of Heth. And what good will they do? What good will it do if Jacob takes a wife from amongst them? So she's putting in a little bit of a prod to Jacob, because we're told that Esau had married people that had upset his parents. I'm just looking for where it says that. The end of chapter 26, the last 2 verses. It says he went and took a wife of the daughter of Berai. The Hittite, and Bashemeth, the daughter of Elon the Hittite, which were a grief of mine. And so when this problem comes up, Rebecca says, hey, look, you know, we don't want more Hittite women around here. And so in the next chapter, chapter 28, Isaac calls Jacob, gives him another blessing and charges him saying, don't take a wife of the people of Canaan. Go to Padanaram to the house of Bethuel, your mother's father, and take thee a wife from thence of the daughters of Laban, thy mother's brother. Interesting thing, just probably 15, 20 years ago now, I used to work with a man who came from Egypt, an Arab man. He wasn't the black Egyptian, he was the slightly lighter. They're still fairly dark. And he married a woman of Denmark. He went up to Denmark and did his university degree and married this woman from Denmark. And they had 1 or 2 children, and then things didn't go very well. He was a Christian, he wasn't a Muslim Arab, he was Christian. And things didn't go very well, and the marriage busted. And he took 6 months from work and went back to his country. And he said, look, give me the 6 months off and I'll work out if I can't come back and whether I stay there or whatever I do. But he said, I've got to sort my life out. And he came back married to a cousin.
To a cousin?
Yeah, so it's the same basic thing as this. And he said, these mixed marriages don't work. Meaning an Egyptian to a woman from Denmark. And so he married a cousin. So she was like him. That was his attitude. And yeah, that was less than 20 years ago.
Maybe the problem was he couldn't master the one from Denmark, so he went back to master the other one because he knew he can.
No,
Yeah.
He could have been the cheap swearing the person, and he didn't have to.
Ishmael's wife was married to Sarah as well. They had the same patterns. Ishmael and Lot.
Yeah.
And again, next generation, same.
I think it's all about it, who is mastering whom, and if you're not allowed to master it, then you're out or treated otherwise. It's just like in every marriage, somebody wants to take the upper hand.
That's only, that's how the Russian women
They have a force.
Anyway, just continuing, I was looking at the overheads, which we can't project because we don't have a switch. And it uses another term for Jacob and Esau, which I thought was interesting. Going right back to the first sessions we had, it calls Jacob the seed of the woman and Esau the seed of the serpent. Because when they were born, it says Jacob was a plain man, and that more or less indicates an honest man. He still had his trickery, but he was capable of looking beyond, where Esau was just a man of the field. He was out shooting or whatever, animals and things like that. He wasn't one for planning for the future or anything like that. The other thing which I think is very interesting, when they were born, it says that Jacob was holding Esau's heel. And the word Jacob literally means to hold or trip the hill. And the term hill tripper means someone who tricks someone. So, yeah, when he went with his brother and then when he went up to his uncle, there was a real clash because his uncle had the same nature. And the two of them were trying to trick each other for about 20 years. So it's built into his name, and then God later changes the name.
It's hard to understand because God never makes an allowance for trickery or
No.
even white lies.
Now, is this word? Yes. So we've got Abraham, Ishmael, we're not going to worry about, and we've got Isaac down to Jacob. When Jacob goes away, he marries by trickery a woman called Leah. That's not the one he loved.
What the trickery he used on her?
His uncle he met Rachel. When he got to the town where they lived, the first person he met was Rachel. And he explained who he was and who he was looking for. And she said, well, I'm Rachel, the daughter of Laban. And he said, oh. And so when he got, when he went to live with them, the first thing he asked for was for Rachel.
Rahel, which was crying over her dead children in Israel?
It's the same Rachel, because when her second child was born, she died during the birth. So whenever there's a problem in Israel, it makes the comment, Rachel weeping for her children.
Yeah.
Yeah. So he wanted Rachel, but they used to cover the face of the bride, and he got Leah. So it says in the morning it was Leah. And so Rachel couldn't have a child. So then, I don't know what I know their names. One is Bilhah, and, I can't remember the other one. Zilpah, yes. They were the handmaidens that Laban had given to his two daughters. And so Rachel gets her handmaid and she says, I'm not being able to have children. Have my handmaiden take children by her. And sometimes in the Bible it calls them wives, and in other times it calls them concubines. And I don't know what the position of those two are, except that later we learn of the 12 tribes, and they all get a position in Israel. So they were elevated to be rightful children. Leah, now, got to work this out, 6. Leah has 4 children before any of this happens. When the 4th one is born, that's when Rachel keeps saying to Jacob, I need a son, I need a son. And he said,
So she
I
had
can't
the
do
children
it.
before she married him?
What's that?
She had the children before?
No, these are Jacob's children.
Okay.
And so then they give, and these 2 handmaids have 2 children each.
To Jacob.
To Jacob. Then Leah has another 2.
That was really public prostitution.
Then Leah has another 2. So Leah's had 6 children. And then Rachel has, and I'll put his name down for Ron, Joseph and Benjamin. 2 sons. And so, if you add that all up, 2, 4, 6, and then 6 there, 12 tribes.
Joseph that becomes stepfather to Jesus.
No, that's the boy that was sold into Egypt.
Your Joseph was by his older brother, his name was M.
What's that?
No. The oldest brother sold Joseph to Israel,
Oh,
and they were Benjamin.
Judah did the selling. So it's Reuben, Simeon, Levi, Judah, Joseph, Benjamin, Dan, Naphtali, Gad, and Asher. But I think it was Judah that actually sold him.
The oldest one sold him.
Yeah, Judah. Yeah. So anyway, he leaves, and on the way, he, and I'll take this out of the notes, it says the dream and the vow at Bethel. On his way going up to Haran, which is, how would you describe it? It's in Mesopotamia. If you virtually go due north of Israel through Syria, today's Syria, it's just over the river Euphrates from there. So it's a fair distance, and meets up, as I said, with Rachel. But on the way, he goes through a town. He slept by himself outside the town, and he has a dream. And while he has the dream, he sees this, it says here, staircase or ladder going up to heaven. And he sees angels coming down and going up on the ladder, and they're caring for him. And he wonders what's going on. And chapter 28. And he looks at the top of the ladder, and whatever he imagined, he sees a figure which represents God. And the figure says, I am the God of Abraham your father, God of Isaac, the land whereon you liest, to thee will I give it, and to your seed. Your seed will be as the dust of the earth. Now, he's not just talking the 12 sons, he's saying that they're going to multiply more. And he knew all this in thy seed. Now, this is important. Verse 14 of chapter 28. These words are said to Abraham, to Isaac, and now to Jacob. And in thy seed shall all the families of the earth be blessed. Now, in explaining how people can lose their birthright and regain it, John made a comment that Israel were supposed to be the birthright descendants from Abraham, but they lost that position. And in redeeming Israel, God brought in Gentiles, which are us. Gentiles are non-Jews, people who aren't Jews. And he says here that in your descendants shall all the families of the earth be blessed. So when the blessing comes to Abraham, it will also come to us. So Christ's return and set up a kingdom on the earth is not just for Israel now, it's for all who read and believe the Bible, Jew and Gentile. And we will all get it together. In thy seed shall all families be blessed. And so then he tells him, I'll go with you. God says, I will go with you and bring you again back to this place. And then he wakes up and it's a dream. But he realises the importance of that dream. And he says, God's at this place. And so he gets in the morning, he gets a stone and sets it up as it says here, a pillar or an altar. And he put oil on it. And he called the name of the place Bethel. And the word Bethel means house of God.
Yeah, I thought it meant place of worship. Because we
Yeah.
have Bethel here.
Yeah, Bethel.
That was-
The word in Hebrew, the word Beth or Beit, they pronounce it more a Beit, means a house. But it can mean a house in the sense of a household. But so he's not just saying the name of that place is the house of God, but God's been talking about his family. And so he's saying, look, this place I'm going to call Bethel, because God's been talking about my family. So he's applying the meaning to himself. Anyway, he leaves Bethel and heads up to Haran in the Mesopotamia. I always thought it was a bit closer down to Israel, but I looked up 3 or 4 sites. And it's above the river Euphrates, which it's virtually level with the bottom of Turkey and about 200 kilometres inland. And he goes up there, and chapter 29, he goes up, and it tells the story where he meets Rachel, and he says, I'm looking for Laban. And she says, he tells some shepherds first, and they said, Rachel's coming. So then he introduced himself to Rachel. We're not going to go through the main story, but he ends up, as I said, marrying those and having the children. There is quite a few, what would you call them? Not quite arguments, but playing for power between him and his uncle Laban. And Laban had promised him things, and when Jacob started to get them, he would change his wages. And so there's a big argument where he goes up and he says, look, I've been here for 20 years and you've changed everything that you promised you'd give me. And so we're moving on rather quickly. We won't go over all the argument. I've mentioned about the children and the birth of the children and how there were arguments between Rachel and Leah. But coming across to chapter 31, at the beginning there, in verse 1, it says, "He heard the words of Laban's son, saying, Jacob hath taken away all that was our father's, and of that which was our father's hath he gotten all this glory." So he's listening to the sons of Laban complaining that he's got everything. And it says he noticed that Laban wasn't happy in his attitude to Jacob. And so then later, God says to him, "I think it's time for you to go back. Go back to the land of your fathers and to your kindred, and I will be with you." So God has told him now, go back. It's funny, or not funny, it's intriguing. Apparently while he was away, because he was the favourite son of Rebekah, when he gets back, there's only Isaac. We're not told anything about Rebekah. So his favourite mum, I'll say, has died while he's away, and he's now told to go back to the place of his fathers. And so he goes and talks to his two wives, and he said, "Look, I don't think your father's interested in me, and God has told me that I should be going back." And they said, "Well, you know, we're not going to get any extra." And so there's an agreement made, and they pack up and decide to leave. There's a few little things, but they leave from him, and he's told to go back. And he goes off and leaves, and Laban eventually chases him up. And when Laban catches him, he says, "Well, why are you running away? They're my daughters. All your sons are my grandchildren. Why are you so scared?" So, you know, he's putting on a bold face. And so that's when Jacob says, "Well, you know, everything's happened." And he said, "I've got to go back to my family anyway." So eventually they come to an agreement. It says they took a stone and set them up for pillar. Verse 44 of chapter 31. "Let us make a covenant, an agreement, and be a witness between them." And so they set it up, and they make this agreement. And the agreement is in verse 49. Joseph says, "Mizpah, for he said, the Lord watch between me and thee when we're absent from each other." And so make this agreement that they won't argue. In other words, they won't be sending sons up to fight each other or anything like that. And so with that, Jacob leaves, and Laban goes back home. Now, Jacob, in verse 3 of chapter 32, Jacob sent messengers before him to Esau his brother into the land of Seir, the country of Edom. And if you remember, it says that when he come to get the pottage off of Jacob, he kept calling it the red pottage, the red stew. And they called his name Edom, which means red. And so Edom was actually down around level with the Dead Sea. So he's just left the area of Mesopotamia and come down, and he sends messages all the way down to Esau to say, "I'm coming home." And he's probably, what would you call it, making a peace agreement with his brother. In other words, "I'm coming back, let's be friends." But the messengers, off they go. I don't know how long, it doesn't tell us how long they took. And the messengers returned in verse 6 and said, "We came to your brother Esau, and he comes to meet you with 400 men." So Jacob is scared stiff. And so he prays to God, and then he divides his camp up into probably 3 different groups. He puts the servants and the animals first, then he puts Leah and the other wives' children, and then he puts Rachel and her child. And so what he's trying to do, and then he himself stays and was going to spend his night in prayer. Now, while he's praying, while he's praying, an angel comes to him. I'm trying to find where it says in the...
There was actually one stage there where 200 went with him.
Yeah.
And virtually he was offered protection that he didn't believe.
Yeah, here it is, verse 24 of chapter 32. Jacob was left alone, and there wrestled a man with him until the breaking of day. Now, he doesn't know at first. He doesn't know it's an angel. So he's offered a prayer, and this man comes and starts fighting him. And the angel, without using God's power, it says he couldn't prevail. He couldn't get the upper hand against Jacob. So Jacob must have been a fairly strong man. And so the angel cripples. I know what he did. He touched his thigh, and now he's got a sore leg. So he's a semi-cripple. You'd know what that's like, Ron.
I just not in the chair, but I think I thought Ernie,
Yeah, and put the hollow of, it says, in mine it calls it the hollow of his thigh was out of joint as he wrestled. And then the angel keeps saying, let me go, the day's coming. And then Jacob now realises that he's wrestling an angel. And he says, I won't let you go unless you bless me. So the angel says, well, what's your name? Oh, my name's Jacob. In verse 28 he says, your name won't be called Jacob anymore, but Israel. For as a prince hast thou power with God and with men, and hast prevailed. And the word Israel, I've got a margin in my Bible and a little number, and it just says, a prince of God. So it's based upon 2 Hebrew words, Ish, meaning a man of note or a prince, and El or Ale at the end, which is one of the names or titles of God. So literally the word Israel means a prince of God. And it's interesting that if you read Isaiah, Jeremiah and things like that, every now and again it talks of Israel as a nation, but then when they're wicked, it calls them Jacob. It goes back to the older name, the natural name. Not the Prince of God name, but the name of the man who trusted in his own strength. And so Jacob then says to the angel, well, what's your name? And he says, well, why do you ask after my name? In other words, I'm an angel. And then the angel blessed him and left. And it says, Jacob called the name of the place Peniel. The pen part, again, pen means face. Panna or pen means his face. And ale. And it says, because I've seen God's face. Now, it was an angel. But the angel represented God. He gave God's blessing. He gave the change of name, which come from God. So he's virtually saying, in seeing that angel, I have experienced God. And my life is preserved. So even though he had fought with the angel, he hadn't died. And I think at that point he realised that God was going to be with him. And it says he got up in the morning and started to limp after his family. Then when he saw his brother, they went up, and the two were united in peace. It's quite an interesting point that they were united in peace. What's her name? Esau offers to actually stay with him and guide him all the way down to Isaac. And he said, look, no, I've got too many children. It's going to take you too long. But look, it's been great that we've been able to meet up. And so Esau says, well, look, do you want more animals? Do you want more flocks? And he said, well, we've got enough. You keep what you've got and everything. And so the two of them parted, apparently quite good friends.
Yeah, but after he'd given him a great gift.
Well, he promised him a great gift.
Yeah, with him he selected a gift for his brother Esau, 200 female goats, 20 male goats, 200 ewes and 20 rams, 30 female camels with their young, 40 cows and 10 bulls, and 20 female donkeys and 10 male donkeys. It was time to buy him out, and yet two angels had already told him he was all right.
Whereabouts is that?
In 32.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
Jacob also went on his way, and the angels of God met him. When Jacob saw them, he said, this is the camp of God. So he named that place Mahanaim.
Yep, that's right.
But he still didn't take their advice. He was still frightened that he was going to get
Yes.
robbed by his brother.
Yep.
So he puts this big gift together to bribe him.
Yeah.
No, he was a manipulator.
Yeah. But he also put them in front so that there was the gift. But if his brother was cross, and
He could nick off out the back door.
he could disappear backwards, yeah. Now just see if there's anything in here that
He was a bit of a shady character, wasn't
who? Jacob.
he?
It took him quite a while actually to come to grips, I think, with the promises of God. He must have done a few things that God could see there was promise coming. Could we turn to Hebrews chapter 11? And in Hebrews chapter 11, there's a list of what we would call faithful people. And it's interesting, I'll still a bit of your thunder, John. In verse 21, it says in verse 20, it says, by faith, Isaac blessed Jacob and Esau concerning things to come. And yet, that was done in trickery. And, but when Isaac realised that it wasn't Esau that he was blessing, he said, I can't change it. Because he'd been told by God that Jacob was to receive the blessing. Jacob was to be the son of those things. But he talks about these things, and there's a whole pile of verse 36 on. There were trials, there were stonings in verse 37. People were killed. Verse 38, of whom the world was not worthy. And they wandered in deserts and in mountains, in dens and caves of the earth. And so he's talking about all the people of the Old Testament, not just Jacob going up to see his uncle and collect some wives. But he says, these all having obtained a good report through faith. So as Jacob lives his life, he learns to trust on God and have faith. And he passes that on to his sons in his final blessing, which we'll be looking at later. He says, and all these, having obtained a good report through faith, received not the promise. So Abraham was given promises, Isaac was given promises, and we mentioned that when he was at Bethel that Jacob received promises. But listen to this, God having provided some better thing for us, that they without us should not be made perfect. So God's promised a kingdom on earth, and he's promised it to those people, but hear what he's saying. But remember it said, not only will your family be blessed, but all families of the earth be blessed. And so he says, not just them, but they without us should not be made perfect. And so those promises that were made by God to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob, and to others, they will be fulfilled, but we can have that hope that they were promised.
I noticed here what we're doing. We're reading from the Old Testament, and yet when we come to Hebrews, that is in the New Testament, and the bulk of that is about Abraham and his.
Yeah.
It's saying here in Hebrews exactly what it's saying back in
Genesis.
and yet it's called the Old Testament called into the New Testament. Seems a bit strange, doesn't it? What's your explanation of that?
Well, if you went through the books of Isaiah and Jeremiah, you'll find that there's a lot of condemnation of the nation of Israel. And what God's virtually saying, and every now and again he says that, I brought your fathers out of Egypt. I was with Abraham and brought him into this land, but you have forgotten me. You don't worship me. And so in the Old Testament, we've got, what would you say? We've got the work of God through the natural children of Abraham, which are the Jews. In the New Testament, we've got the work of God through Christ and the people of promise.
But he's still referring to Abraham and virtually the promises.
Well, see, he says to Abraham, as I showed you back there, and he said the same to Jacob, in you shall all families of the earth be blessed. So God knows that not all of Israel is going to be faithful. So he says, in you all families will be blessed. Now, having spoken to a couple of Jews about that, they don't interpret it like the New Testament. What they're saying, if you're alive when our Messiah comes, you'll be in a better world. Whereas what the New Testament is saying, we will be blessed with the same blessing that God promised to those people. So that in a sense, the hope of the kingdom is the hope of Israel. The hope that was promised to Abraham, Isaac and Jacob, and for that nation, because the nation as a whole. And so the nation today isn't a religious nation. You know, I forget which one, I think it's Bennett, the one that's just stood down last week. He was one of the few that actually is very religious.
What did they say in news yesterday? I think that the Australians now, it used to be nation of Christian, and now I think they said it left not even 30%. Most went out.
At the moment, yeah, I heard that just, it was on the news on the way down actually.
You know, I heard that yesterday
Oh.
when I was watching, and they said, what they are
They've just done a survey, and as far as religion is concerned, there's 49% have ticked they belong to a religion.
Yeah.
10 years ago, there was something like 60% were Christian, and now it's about 40% tick for Christian. And they're looking and seeing a tendency of that to be dropping.
From the census, I think, because
Yeah.
there is that religion thing.
We've got a lot of places here that are named after the Bible, and they were actually named by the German settlers for our state.
Mm.
We've got a Bethel, several other names that come to mind.
Yeah.
And that's why I thought Bethel was actually a place of worship. In other words, if you chose to go to your bedroom to worship God, to pray to God, that then was your Bethel. That's what I understood it, so that is wrong.
Yeah.
Well,
Just
the God said, don't build me a church
Yeah, well,
We need that.
yeah, I was just trying to think. So a thought came. Yeah, you remember when you first came, we used to have Chinese
Yes.
groups, and we would have about 5 groups in this hall, and we'd all split up into groups, and there was around 10 to 15 Chinese people. The interesting thing was the Chinese people were coming here because a group of Chinese people that go to our meeting out Enfield Way had put a Chinese website up saying, if you want to learn the Bible, come to us. And then they would direct them either here, out at the one at Enfield, there's one over Kernlight Gardens, they'd direct them to come and have lessons on the Bible. But the reason why the Chinese were looking up these websites, and we were getting a huge number of Chinese, was they believed that Australia was a Christian country. And so they were coming here to go to university, but they were going to come and learn about the Bible to learn the culture of the country.
Yeah, so that was not a true yearning to learn, was it? It
No.
was a secondary thing. I understood that.
Mm.
But you still got those that, when they came along, learned a little bit and found faith in it. So they stayed, but the majority of them, that's exactly right. A lot of the Chinese that were told to come here was to learn about the culture so that they could understand and manipulate, and that was wrong. But strangely enough, they've all been sorted out, and those that were genuine stayed.
Yeah. Was John King here when you first came?
I think he was here.
Yeah. He died, but I think he was here when you first arrived.
I think we had a lecture with
And-
him once or
And
twice.
in the 3 or 4 years between his death and COVID coming, because we've had no new Chinese since then, out of 10 that we had here, there were 4 baptisms when they went back to China
That's good. Yeah.
through Skype and Zoom and all that type of stuff.
Someone once said that with the Indian, what was his name, the guru over there years ago, Mahatma Gandhi. Heavenly Mahatma Gandhi went into a church once, and he was looking at, in the early days, looking at what way he should sort of be going, and he was right put off and wasn't treated properly, and so he formed his own religion afterwards. Now, it makes you wonder, had he been accommodated properly and treated properly, and he took to the Christian faith, have a look how many of his followers would have then become Christians.
Hmm.
So someone slipped up.
Yeah.
And I thought about that, and I
Yeah,
thought, yeah,
but
it's,
Indians are actually divided by the conquest of Texas. One part of India is Catholic, that's where was the Spanish, the stuff. The other one is the Hindus, and the other one you have those, oh gosh, the
Muslim. Yeah. All right, what we might do is close now, and then we can continue talking as necessary. Now, next week is the final session in this particular seminar. We haven't actually got anything planned after, in terms of formal seminars, after next week. A few of us are going to be away, actually. It's school holidays. So, it's a,
Yes. Yep.
yeah,
definitely,
yeah.
yes, thank you.
So it's going to be more informal, sort
Yep.
of, yeah,
No worries.
yeah.
Take your
Right.
toes up, flex your toes if you can.
Mm. So what we'll do is we'll close in prayer now. So let's offer a prayer to God. O Lord, our God, even the God which desires to bless, a God of mercy and a God of truth, we thank you for the opportunity this evening to open your word and to think about it and to learn from characters of old, of Isaac, of Abraham, of Jacob. Help us to take these lessons into our lives and develop that faith which you so desire of us. For without faith it is impossible to please you. Please be with us as we go to our homes, and help us in our understanding as we read your word, that we might come closer to you day by day. We pray for your blessing through Jesus' name. Amen.
Well, Mino. So they have Minos, so 3 Minos, yeah.